Um, so we're doing audio today because of a poor internet connection, and we're looking at that section of famous sense control verses, the turtle drawing its limbs within the shell, and especially the Param Drishtva verse, the famous verse about getting the higher taste. And so I just want to share and kind of echo Jacob's words here that when rereading this section kind of in depth this time around, it just struck me, and this never really struck me before, how when you actually look at all these verses, where did we start? Where were you supposed to start? I'm sorry, I'm because I got the questions, but where did I tell you to start reading from?
I started at
Uh,
250, but
54.
I think we could have started at 254.
254.
Exactly.
Okay. So when you look at all these verses, basically aside, just except for the Param Drishtva verse, right? The 259, all the verses are basically talking about controlling your senses, right? But
Yeah.
259 does give the thing about talk about the higher taste principle, higher taste from Krishna consciousness, right? But all the other verses, when you actually look at them sort of in their raw form without Prabhupada's purport, they're about controlling your senses, period, right? There's really only one verse in this whole section which has a sort of a very, hey, you got to get the higher taste. You got to engage your senses in Krishna's service. You got to get Krishna's mercy in order to control the senses. That verse is pretty explicit in 59, but all the other ones are pretty generic. And so what's really far out is that Prabhupada, he's the one who, like, purport after purport after purport in all those verses is ramming that same message, that same simple, essential message that's in 259, but he applies it in all those verses, that, hey, you got to get a higher taste. You got to engage your senses in Krishna's service. He kind of does, if I can allow myself to say this, he kind of does in these verses, in his purports, what he does across a lot of translations of the Chaitanya Charitamrita, for example, especially regarding the Maha Mantra. Can I explain myself? Or that kind of sounds corny. Allow me to explain myself. When you look at a lot of Prabhupada's translations, when it comes to things related to the holy name, especially in the Chaitanya Charitamrita, there's so many examples where Kaviraj Goswami, right, the author of Chaitanya Charitamrita, he uses a very generic term like Krishna Nam, right? So what does Krishna Nam mean, Golokananda Priya?
Name of Krishna.
That's it. So that could be Govinda, Gopal, Krishna, it could be all sorts of names of Krishna, right? And yet, when you look at the word for word, Prabhupada takes this huge liberty. He took this huge license to put in the word for word translation, and in the translation itself, not just Krishna's name, as Kaviraj Goswami says, he said he puts the Maha Mantra, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Ram, Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare, where the original actual term that's used by Kaviraj Goswami is way more generic. There's only a few cases where Kaviraj Goswami, for example, explicitly mentions the Maha Mantra, but Prabhupada's just like, he takes any and all opportunities. Oh, here it says Krishna Nam, it's the Maha Mantra, So and we respect that. Like, some scholars will and have and will continue to criticize Prabhupada's translations for not being literal enough. You know what I mean? But we accept that's his prerogative as a Mahabhagavat pure devotee. And there's a point that Hridayananda Maharaj makes, which I think is brilliant. He says that if a pure devotee is seeing Krishna in a particular way, or even describes a pastime of Krishna in a particular way, even if it may not be mentioned in the Bhagavatam or in the Chaitanya Charitamrita, then that pastime or that description is reality. Why? Because Krishna reciprocates always with the mood and the love of his pure devotee, right? So if in the eye of a pure devotee, like it actually happened like this, then like and only of course in the eye of a totally pure devotee, then Krishna's like, yep, okay, yep, that's reality. That is how I did it, or that's me. And yep, it is the Maha Mantra, even though Kaviraj Goswami may say it's just Krishna Nam, So I find that really cool. That's like an example of how we can kind of get to know Prabhupada and the the special character of Prabhupada, which comes out and which is manifest through, for example, his translation choices. It just, in this case, it shows how much he was just such a fan, in France we say un fanat, which is short for fanatique, for a fanatic. He was sort of a fanatic of the Maha Mantra, and you see, and you wouldn't guess, but when you actually look at his translation work, you see that. So coming back to these verses, you see a sort of a similar license that Prabhupada's taking, where even though most of these verses are just talking about generic sense control, right? Prabhupada is just like ramming home. It's through Krishna Bhakti. It's only through engaging your senses in Krishna service. It's only if you engage your senses in Krishna service and therefore get a higher taste that you'll be able to, give up the lower taste. Interesting point. Prabhus? Can someone say amen? Hello? Shit.
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
Hey, Prabhu, you mentioned, Krishnadas Kaviraj Goswami emphasizes. I said, hey, Prabhu.
Yeah? You can hear me, huh? We just have a really bad connection.
You mentioned that
if you don't hear me, please do tell me. Like if I cut in and out, please do mention it.
We hear you.
Okay. There's, I guess, just a delay. So what'd you say, Jacob?
I was just going to ask a question. You mentioned Krishnadas Kaviraj Goswami emphasized chanting the holy name in general, and Prabhupada emphasized chanting of the Maha Mantra. Historically, I was wondering if Vaishnavas chanted other mantras, or emphasized other names at different times.
I'm not a big historian of Gaudiya Vaishnavism, so I wouldn't be able to tell you, but I mean, we do, for example, Lord Chaitanya chanted that, Haraya Nama Krishna Yadavaya Namaha Gopal Govindaram Shri Madhusudan. It's interesting because there's that second part of the first verse, Yadavaya Madhavaya Keshavaya Manmaha, but Kaviraj Goswami mentions only the, Haraya Nama Krishna Yadavaya Namaha Gopal Govindaram Shri Madhusudan. Those two lines as Lord Chaitanya, one of Lord Chaitanya's favorites. So yeah, there were definitely other names, but yeah, thanks to Prabhupada, somehow the Maha Mantra, thanks to Prabhupada's desire, or maybe it's it's Mahaprabhu's desire through Prabhupada, but it's there's no question that the Maha Mantra specifically now, since Prabhupada came to the West, is really the staple, the standard, the mantra par excellence. That he practiced in his own life and emphasized, and in his own life and in his own translation work. Okay, so let's go to the questions. So everyone answered nicely, except question 4 and 5 from our dear Jacob, which I'm sure would have been really cool. Yeah, the defining characteristic of a devotee of Krishna. Where'd you get that quote, by the way, Jacob? That's kind of funny. Better to remain silent and be thought a fool than to speak and remove all doubt.
It's one of those quotes that's like attributed to several people, but I don't know. I've heard it attributed to Benjamin Franklin, and I'm not quite sure if he actually said it, but it's a good one.
Yeah, it is a good one. Vignesh, just so you know, and Golokananda Priya and Annabella, there's this. Yeah. Maybe I said it too fast, but Jacob quoted this statement which says that it is better to remain silent and be thought a fool. Like, in other words, it's better to remain silent and have people think that, you know what, maybe he's a fool, than to speak and remove all doubts. Yep, that's what we thought. He is a fool. That's kind of funny. But yeah, how the speaker, I mean, you recognize a sadhu or a sadhvi by speech, not by how he looks or what he wears or doesn't wear, but by, you know, when he opens his mouth. You know, a fool is only recognized when he opens his mouth, Prabhupada says in the purport, I think. So that tells you that, you know, again, hearing is really, really, really important. Hearing. So you gotta, you know, read those books of Prabhupada. By the way, now that I think about it, are you, I don't know how much you like to, if you do a lot of driving, for example, or a lot of sort of work at home that doesn't require to switch on your intelligence, or to put, you know, you can do things on automatic pilot, which are activities which enable you to hear lectures, like when you're brushing your teeth or when you're cooking, you know, a lot of time goes by during those moments. And are you aware, I mean, I don't know how much, you know, hearing you like to do, but you know that Prabhupada's books are on audio format, including the Srimad Bhagavatam with purports. There's a website called the Bhaktivedanta Vedic Library.
You're going in and out.
Oh shoot! Can you hear me?
You're back now.
Okay. Yeah, we're just gonna have to. We're just gonna have to tolerate.
You just say Vedic. I didn't hear something before.
It's called the Bhaktivedanta Vedic Library. Did you hear what I said? Did you guys hear what I said? Hello?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, I'm switching off like literally
Bhaktivedanta Vedic
Yes,
Library.
we can hear you.
Okay, I'm switching off every possible, switching off the internet here. And by the way, I'm really sorry. It's just, you know, this is beyond my control. Somebody literally stole my internet. So, okay, I'm switching off Safari. So now we should have 0. Okay, so yeah, the Bhaktivedanta Vedic Library is really, really, really cool.
Yeah.
Who's not aware of it?
I was not aware of it. Maybe it's look interesting now. I'm just going through it.
What
Maybe I'll
about
try.
Jacob and Sorel and Golokananda Priya and Annabella?
Yeah.
Yeah, we've heard of it.
Okay.
I heard it. Yeah.
I learned about it when you were on, I think it was Namrat's podcast.
Oh, really? I spoke about that. That's cool. I said something useful.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, so it's really important to hear. So, you know, and like again, like, you know, Arjuna is like, okay, what are the questions specifically that Krishna that Arjuna asks? Can someone say? How does he?
Arjuna said, "O Krishna, what are the symptoms of one whose consciousness is submerged in transcendence? How does he speak, and what is his language? How does he sit, and how does he walk?"
That's kind of funny, though. You know, how does he sit? Like, is there like, you know, like, so? Oh yeah, you see how he sits down on that chair? He's a pure devotee. There's no question about it. Like,
what does he wear?
maybe we can ask Arjuna that if we ever get a chance to have his darshan in the spiritual world. Like, what do you mean by that? Like, you know, speaking, okay, language, fine. Even walking, like, oh, you see his gait? That's a pure devotee. Like, is it symbolic, or because sitting and walking, as if that's like, there's some special way to walk and talk that signifies you're a pure devotee? Interesting, huh?
Yeah.
Anyway, I guess there's some things we're just gonna have to find out when we go back to God. There's a disciple of Sridhar Maharaj called Balaram, who I haven't seen him for a long time, and he was kind of like a slow talking, kind of real nice, thoughtful, kind of kind of hippie, kind of real nice Balaram. And so once I remember he asked Sridhar Maharaj on a morning walk, he's like, "Oh, Churdev, in the spiritual world, what happens to like when the leaves fall on the ground? Like, is there some sort of recycling, composting system that takes place?" and Sridhar Maharaj told him, "Why don't you just go there and find out?" So I guess there's some things that we're just gonna have to find out when we go there. Like, for example, sorry to be off topic here, but it's kind of related. In the story of King Bharat Maharaj, when like there's a story, he's like a king sage who goes to the river. I mean, he goes to the forest and builds a hermitage and starts, getting ready for death, and then he sees a stag drinking water, and she's pregnant. Remember? And then you always wonder, like, why didn't the lion eat the baby? Because like a lion shows up or a tiger, she runs away, she jumps into the river, frightened, she drowns, and while she's jumping, or just as she's jumping, she gives birth to the baby. Like, you'd think that would be like a delicatessen for a tiger, and the tiger's right there. So like, how come he just kind of disappears from the story? Like, why didn't he just eat up the baby stag as like a as an appetizer or something? Anyway, we'll have to figure that out when we come back. So the point is, though, like Prabhupada explains, right? As there's symptoms for each and every man, well, the talking, walking, thinking, but especially as important is, and you guys got it all right. Most important is how the man in Krishna consciousness speaks. For speech is the most important quality of any man, right? So yeah, he or she only speaks of Krishna, and that's how you can tell a sadhu, right? And so, Jacob, you raised a good point. Like, where do you draw the line between Gramya Katha and Krishna Katha? Why did you bring that point up? How is that like difficult to ascertain?
Well, I guess mainly because there are times when, for example, I mentioned that the 6 loving exchanges. One of them is revealing your mind in confidence, and so if you are speaking, something that's, I don't know, something that's going on in your life that you're trying to work through with a fellow devotee or a mentor, that's not necessarily about Krishna, and so it might be perceived to be something that is a hinder, something that like lesser talk.
Prabhu, I really have had suicidal thoughts. Shut up, only ask me questions about the Bhagavatam.
Yeah. Yeah, and I've experienced similar things, not necessarily like that, but just in the temple, like at breakfast after Mangalarti, like basically no one's talking because they're like afraid that an elder is going to hear them with
Really?
frivolous talk. And yeah, I mean, it's not so extreme like that, but I've definitely experienced sometimes.
Good question. Okay.
I guess that sort of, I guess that, emotional problems or things that you're going through could be a hindrance to your Krishna consciousness, and could kind of be, you could say that it's topics pertaining to Krishna in that way. But anyway.
Well, you just have to also, I think, be careful about who you ask, like, who you reveal your mind to. Because, if you're going to, you got to just be intelligent about who you trust and to hear your thoughts.
Sure.
It's going to be a jerk who's just going to say, Prabhu, please don't bother me with non-directly Krishna conscious things. And maybe that's not the right person to reveal your mind to,
Yeah, absolutely.
Right. So for the second question, I have to say that Vignesh gave a great answer. The second question is, what does Krishna actually mean by finding satisfaction in the self? And the question of like, okay, well, what self are we talking about here? Right? Are you guys with me on 255 here?
Yes.
Yep.
It's weird of not being
Yes.
able to see you,
I know.
but I guess we can just hear each other. That's the most important thing. So finding satisfaction in the self. Let me share my screen with you. Nah, I don't want to take a risk. Let me just read to you here what I can read, Vignesh. I'm sure you don't mind.
Sure.
So he quoted the Brihad Aranyaka Upanishad 148, which says, and I'll just read you the translation: this self is dearer than one's own son, dearer than one's wealth, dearer than everything else, and is innermost. So that would kind of be an explanation as, well, first of all, what is the self? What is that thing that's innermost, that thing that's very dear to us, right? And then he brings up some two verses from the 14th chapter of the 10th canto of the Bhagavatam, where Shukadeva Goswami is speaking, and he says these, and I'll read these to you. He says, Shukadeva Goswami says, "O king, for every created being, the dearmost thing is certainly what? Can someone guess? Except Ganesh. The dearmost thing is certainly, for every created being, his
Relationship with Krishna.
His
Self.
own self.
Ah.
The dearest, the dearness of everything else, children, wealth, and so on, is due only to the dearness of the self. For this reason, O best of kings, the embodied soul is self-centered. He is more attached to his own body and self than to his so-called possessions like children, wealth, and home. And here, one interesting point that Vignesh makes, he says, if someone asks, is this self the individual soul, right, the Jivatma, or is it, self with a capital S, meaning like Krishna, Paramatma, then Shukadeva Goswami explains that this self is actually Krishna. Krishnam enam abehitvam atmanam akilatmanam. Where is that verse? I didn't check it out, but that what you quoted there, Vignesh? Krishnam enam.
The same verse from the same chapter. 14th
it's
chapter only. It's a continuation
from the same verse.
of that.
It's the same. It's the next
Same
verse.
continuation.
Okay.
Yeah.
But I was thinking. So yeah. So oops. It's talking about the Paramatma. But you know what?
Yeah.
Even though we're not Advaita Vedantists, we're not Mayavadis, we don't believe that the soul is Krishna. Obviously, we are not Krishna. However, Krishna calls us his parts. We are amsas of Krishna. Mamevam sho jiva loke jiva bhuta sanatana. We're eternal, as Prabhupada would call them, parts and parcels of Krishna, right? So in that sense, we're not completely different from Krishna. And so in that sense, when the word self is described here, even if we were referring to the Atma, the same point is concluded, because since we in our pure state are eternal servants of Krishna, his servant parts and parcels, our real self-interest is giving pleasure to Krishna, and as a result being happy ourselves. You know what I mean? Like ultimately, ourselves it's us as souls who are experiencing Krishna's reciprocation and loving Krishna and feeling his love as a result, right? And so either way, whether it's just Krishna that's being referred to, the self, and it is. I mean, Shukadeva Goswami says, so it's Krishna, but remember, we are his parts and parcels. And so when we are actually doing the right thing, when we're actually watering the root of the tree, and I use that analogy because that's a verse from the, what verse is that from? What canto? Vignesh, the analogy of the tree and the root and the feeding the stomach. Yata tarar mula nishe chanena tripyanti yatskanda bujo pashaka. That's a verse
Early, maybe before 10th canto, before 10th canto.
definitely before 10th canto. You know that verse, guys? The analogy of the root of the tree,
It's the 4th canto.
4th canto. Jacob G.
Yeah, I've heard it.
What is it? It's a double analogy.
As you mentioned, nourishing the roots of the trees rather than feeding the leaves, and then also the hands feeding the stomach, right?
Right. And so when you do that, all the extremities of the body are satisfied and healthy, and all the branches are healthy, right? So coming back to this verse, about finding satisfaction in the self alone, well, what does that actually mean? It means finding satisfaction in the self. Like if it's Krishna, that means you find satisfaction in giving satisfaction to Krishna, just like you're pouring water on the root. And by doing that, you also, as an Atma, as a small self with a small s, you also feel satisfied, right?
Mhm.
And that's what we're striving for, guys. I was just listening to a lecture. The problem is, like, we don't have a taste. We're gonna go to the lecture of instruction in one of in the next book or two, next module, and Golokananda Priya. What does Rupa Goswami mention in the lecture of instruction about our state of affairs for most of us?
I don't remember.
Okay, Vignesh Ji, what does
State of affairs.
huh?
What did you say? Can you repeat once?
What does Rupa Goswami mention in one of his famous Nectar of Instruction verses about what is our condition and how we, what is our condition vis-a-vis? No, that's Kaviraj Goswami in the Chaitanya Charitamrita. But he mentions that we're kind of sick with a sickness, which is compared to
like a jaundice or something?
Yes, exactly, to jaundice. You follow, Annabella? I guess you could put your thumbs up. So jaundice, you know what jaundice is, Sorel?
Yeah, it's where you don't get enough sunlight, right?
Oh, I don't know.
I thought it was that. Am I wrong?
I would assume maybe you are, because
Or
this
enough
is like this is
vitamins.
India, man. Like India is one of the sunniest countries in the whole world. So
I think the skin turns yellow.
Yeah, you turn yellow.
you turn yellow, right? It's something to do with
Everything sweet
exactly
tastes bitter.
everything sweet tastes really bitter. That's a symptom of
Oh, I
of
didn't
when you
know
have
that.
jaundice. Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
the disease of the liver, right?
Well, we can manufacture in China an artificial jaundice and give it to you. I'm kidding. Sorry,
No,
bad
thank
joke. So jaundice, like everything sweet is unpalatable. So the reason I mentioned it is because I was listening to a lecture, like I don't know when I try to listen to Prabhupada a lot, or as much as I can, and he was saying, when you can say Coca-Cola, and you get tired of it, but when you chant Hare Krishna, you can chant Hare Krishna 24 hours. And I was like, I don't think so, like not me, and that's like not most of us, For most of us, it's like, oh my God, I still have 8 freaking rounds and it's already 7 p.m. Jesus, That's it's like, what's that famous, swallow a frog, eat a frog, the famous book by, he's one of those like self-help gurus. And he wrote a book called Swallow That Frog. And he gives the analogy that like you should the first thing in the morning you should do is do the thing that is the most difficult to do and knock it out. And there's really nothing more difficult to do are the things you can imagine to do than to swallow a live frog. I mean, that's pretty nasty. But so like swallow that frog, do the first thing. So like we see our japa, we see our I mean, maybe not you, but I do. I'll be honest. Okay, maybe I'm exaggerating a little bit because I'm a microscopic humble, but overall, I don't think I'm being a hypocrite, like on the humility side, if I honestly admit that, chanting those rounds is an austerity. It's an austerity. And that's where our problem is. You see, we're not experiencing so much higher taste. We're not experiencing much higher taste. And so as a result, this thing that Krishna tells us when he's like, hey, find satisfaction in the self alone, for a Mahabhagava, for a pure devotee who's on the platform of spontaneous devotional service, where like, you turn on the computer and then you've got all these default settings. Did I ever tell you about this analogy that I'm proud that I came up with about default settings in a computer?
No.
No? Well, like Ridhanamar says, at no extra cost, I'm going to tell you, like, when you turn on a computer, you've got default settings. So that means as soon as the laptop is turned on, whatever, Skype turns on, whatever default settings you set up the computer to be, okay? So someone who's like a pure devotee, like who's on the platform of spontaneous devotion to Krishna, as soon as you turn on his or her consciousness, so to speak, his or her default settings is spontaneous attraction to Krishna. It's like they can't help it. It's like automatically attracted to Krishna. And you know what's a really good example of this? I don't think it's directly in the Bhagavatam 10th canto, but maybe it's one of the Goswami literatures. Maybe it's in the 10th canto, but it's definitely there in the descriptions of Goloka Vrindavan and how the gopis see Krishna. And there's one passage, and again, I'm sorry for not giving you the exact reference, but it's definitely there, where, the gopis, the cowherd damsels, at one point in one of those divine leelas are angry with Krishna, okay? And they get together and they're like, you know what, girls? Let's just stop talking about this jerk. I mean, of course, the word jerk is not used, but you get the mood, that's definitely the mood. They're like, he's this and he's that and he's ungrateful and he, blah, blah, blah. And then so you know what? Let's just boycott him. Let's just not talk about him. And they're like, yep. And then there's like it's described as like a moment of like 3 seconds silence. Or 5 seconds. I'm exaggerating, I'm taking a little liberty, but the Siddhanta is definitely there. So there's a moment where they're like not talking about Krishna, silent. And then one of them can't help it and breaks the silence and says, oh, but when he plays his flute, it's so beautiful. And the other, chimes in, oh yes, and when he dances, it's so attractive. And when he comes back from the cow, and they can't help. They could resist themselves for like, for 3 seconds, but then because their default settings is spontaneous glorification and spontaneous attraction to Krishna, they just can't hold back for more than 3 seconds. It's the Bhagavatam describes it. Again, I don't know if it's the Bhagavatam, forgive me, but how the gopis it's definitely in the Bhagavatam, because Sanatana Goswami quotes that verse. Again, I'm not totally sure, but I'm almost sure he, if you want, I could give you this really cool, there's 64 verses that Sanatana Goswami calls the Bhakti Rasayana verses. And it's his own special hand-picked collection of 64 verses from the 10th canto, which is described, is used as a meditation to chant the holy name as an accompanying tool. And so if I'm not mistaken, in one of those verses, the gopis, they curse Brahma. Why do they curse Brahma? Or why are they angry at Brahma? Does anyone know?
Because it created the eyelid, which prevent them to see Krishna constantly
Did everyone hear?
without stopping.
Oh, yeah.
Yes.
Well said. The eyelids, they close for a split second, and as a result, like, oh no, 11 years or more, 8 years or more, as Lord Chaitanya says, right? Niyamitas yugayitam nimeshena chakshusha prabhishayitam shunyayitam jagat sarvam govinda virahinam. Oh Govinda, feeling your separation, I'm considering a moment to be like 12 years or more. So that moment could well be that, clinging, like closing of the eyelids for whatever, a fifth of a second, which seems to them to be like 8 years or more. So the point is, they can't stop thinking, glorifying, speaking about Krishna. So when Prabhupada, coming back to Prabhupada, when Prabhupada says, you know, you get tired of chanting Coca-Cola, but when you chant Hare Krishna, you can chant 24 hours. It's you almost want to say, well, that's easy for you to say, Prabhupada, because you're on that level of spontaneous devotion to Krishna. As opposed to us, at least speaking for myself, we've got these default settings towards sense gratification. It's just like that famous morning walk that Giriraj Swami talks about, right? It was on Juhu, and a devotee tells Prabhupada, but sometimes I forget Krishna. Sometimes I'm in Maya. And what did Prabhupada say? You're always in Maya. Sometimes you're in Krishna. So that's the default setting for us. That's unfortunate. And so practically speaking, I wanted to talk about this right now, the practical side of it, and just on a specific thing that I think is important for us to talk about, because it wasn't a factor even 5-10 years ago. And it's social media and morning time. I just wanted to talk about this for a few seconds, because I think it has to be, this idea of finding satisfaction in the self is a general concept that, we should always, from morning to night, try to, find satisfaction in the self, no matter what our responsibilities are and so on. But that and I'm talking to myself too, those morning hours, my friends, from the time we wake up, and hopefully, you can wake up before Brahma Muhurta. It's really important. Find out when the sunrise is where you live and calculate an hour and a half backwards. And from that time, move forward 48 minutes. Those 48 minutes starting an hour and a half, or 48 times 2. So that's slightly more than an hour and a half. Let's just say 45 minutes. So that 45 minutes starting an hour and a half before sunrise is really, 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 really important. And unless you're like living in St. Petersburg, or Alaska, and it's like you're in June or July or August and the sun rises at like 3 a.m, it's usually pretty easy to catch that Brahma Muhurta, especially in the winter season that we're in right now. So it's super important to like when you're going to bed, you're like, okay, you got to calculate, okay, I need at least 6-7 hours. When's Brahma Muhurta tomorrow? Okay, I gotta, so you can at least be up by Brahma Muhurta. And those 45 minutes, and just don't touch your goddamn phone or your social media. I'm serious. Like, how many of us, go to sleep like scrolling TikTok or scrolling Instagram or scrolling YouTube? And again, it's not bad. It's not pornography. It's not, some bad stuff. But it's definitely Gramya Kata, unless you're, only scrolling, Indradyumna Swami and Vaisheshika's, pages, and I doubt that's our case, right? But that morning time, you gotta, some devotees, and I'll, what I do? I found a system. I have a phone, and I also have an iPod. And on my iPod, I've disabled Safari, and I don't have Instagram, I don't have Facebook. It's just, I only have Kindle and an MP3 player and Audible, where I have some books, audiobooks. And in that morning time, that phone is switched off and it's put away in another room. Most of the time, actually, not most of the time, on the contrary, but I'm working on it. Because and who's a great example, and I want to share this with you, because this is like practical param drishtva here. If we're going to get that param drishtva, then we got, God helps those who help themselves. And so if in that morning, those sacred morning hours, you really just focus on Krishna, not even Krishna related messages, because one thing leads to the other. Like, okay, let me see who wrote to me. Oh yeah, that's really, and then boom, next thing you know, you're like scrolling and wasting, and you've let non-Krishna conscious stuff enter your consciousness during those rare, very precious morning hours, where your consciousness is like a sponge, and the rest of the day is affected by what that sponge absorbs in those morning hours, right? So if somehow you can just like resist the temptation, you know, here there's a verse we'll see, okay, if we ever get to them, the Vashehi Yasya Yendriyani. Vashehi Yasyendriyani? What verse is that exactly? Vashehi Yasyendriyani. Vashehi. It's in that series of verses.
But I
Vashehi.
think it's
59.
Huh? In
Isn't
58?
it? I thought it was 59, but I could be wrong.
59 is
59.
param drištva.
59.
Oh yeah, 50.
Vashehi Yasyendriyanam. I think it's the next one.
What is the English translation?
Well, that's what I'm trying to remember. 55, 56. For once, I remember the Sanskrit because I remember that was really I remember that, you know, from like 25 years ago. That was like really wow. Maybe it's 60.
Vishayanindriyas.
There's the word Vashehi is 61. Tani sarvani samyamya yukta asita matpara. Vashehi yasyendriyani tasya pragya pratishtita. Right? One who restrains his senses. So you see, there is this, you know, and Vignesh, you brought it, you made a good point about it. Like it seems contradictory, like that, you know, we should really get the higher taste first. I mean, usually you think you restrain your senses first, then you get the higher taste, but we believe in, you know, getting the higher taste first, and that enables you to control your senses. Nevertheless, when you actually look at Krishna's words, okay, not to, you know, ignore Prabhupada and Prabhupada's Siddhanta, which we believe is the ultimate thing, there is still this notion of restraining your senses. There is, you know, that's unavoidable in the Sanskrit. In Krishna's own words, there is this notion of restraining your senses. You know, pulling your senses from the outside world, like the tortoise brings its senses inside the shell, right? So in the morning time, that bringing of the senses, you know, inside your shell, so to speak, or restraining your senses, can very well mean restrained from going on freaking Instagram at 5 a.m, restraining from going on Facebook, restrained from, you know, I love to watch the NBA highlights. Somehow I'm a fan of the LA Lakers, even though I think LeBron James is a jerk. But like, you know, and so many times I'm like chanting japa, my phone's right there, and then boom, next thing I know, I'm watching the highlights of, you know, these. I mean, some of them are really pious, but you know, they're not your greatest saints on earth. And I've just, you know, I've seen their faces, I've heard these commentators, and it's just like I've sort of polluted my consciousness, you know. So, and this is the story I wanted to tell you. Bhaktivedanta Thakur, I'll always remember this. I went to a seminar by Mandakini, Mother Mandakini, who's one of the first French devotees that Prabhupada actually sent to Russia to marry, you know, the devotee, the young man that Prabhupada met on the street, right, in Moscow the day before he left, and initiated him really quick. So then he came to London and asked her if she would like to go to London and marry this guy. Next time I'll tell you the story if you remind me, because we've been telling too many stories. But man, what she did, like what Prabhupada asked her to do. Can you imagine? You're a 19-year-old Parisian chick with your whole life ahead of you. And then Prabhupada says, hey, would you like to go to Moscow and marry Vladimir? and this is like in the height of the Cold War. And you're like, okay. And then, oh my God. Anyway, she was giving the seminar on the life of Bhaktivinoda Thakur. And the only thing I remember from that seminar, and she got this from, you know, authorized sources, that Bhaktivinoda Thakur, who, remember, would wake up at like, you know, midnight or 1 a.m. to do his writing, right? He would not touch his correspondences, which is basically our equivalent of Instagram, Facebook, Messenger, email, intranet, until after breakfast. Until after breakfast. So we really should follow in his footsteps. And you'll notice, and I'm speaking from experience, if during those 2-3 hours, including Brahma Muhurta, during that morning time, you're up and you're, you know, chanting the holy name, or reading, or hearing a lecture, or worshiping your deity, or, you know, direct direct devotional service, especially based on hearing on Shravanam Kirtanam, the rest of your day is so different than on other days where you sleep in during Brahma Muhurta, or during those times, you know, you water down the milk by going online. Huge difference. Huge difference. So I just wanted to throw that by you, because I don't know what your habits are, and it's your personal life, but I can speak from experience. I again and again fall victim to that, and I regret it after. You know, I remember briefly, I don't want to talk about myself, but like before the internet days, I remember I used to go on a morning walk right after Brahma Muhurta with Brigupati Prabhu, and we'd walk for like an hour around Culver City. And I tell you, just show you how much, you know, my default setting is for sense gratification. So there was no internet, there was no cell phones, no internet. So from 4 in the morning till you know 6 o'clock or 5:30, nothing, no problem. And then on the Japa, so we'd walk, and then I remember there was a corner we turned, and when we turned that corner, about halfway through the morning walk, there was one of those stands where you put in 50 cents or a quarter, and you lift up and you take a copy of the newspaper. You know, you still see those sometimes on streets, right? Street corners in America. Vignesh, that's and Annabella. Like in America, you have these little, at least you used to have these sort of, they look like a little, whatever, like a post box, but with a glass, so you could see through it. You could see the headlight, the headlines of the folded newspaper. And so you just put in your coin in, and you lift up the thing, and you take one newspaper. And I remember I used to like hanker to walk by that corner so I could look at what the headlines are, you know? And so now it's just like, oh my God, you multiply that by a million, and it's not even close to the distractions we have. So these cell phones, you know, remember, like, while they're really useful for Yukta Vairagya, and devotees do use them, you know, in the service of the preaching mission, they're manufactured by people who are making tons of money on us, you know? So for all the posts we put up and all the posts we read, there's all these billions of bucks being made on us, you know, on Instagram, on Facebook, on, you know, Messenger, on TikTok, on YouTube, all of it. Right? So it's an aggressive thing that's actually aggressive, you know, it's an aggressive thing against us, you know. And so we really have to buckle down and protect our bhakti. And so we have to make a conscious effort, vashehi yasyendriyani, like Krishna says, you know, restraining your senses at least. And like Bhaktivinoda Thakur used to do that. He restrained his senses, and while his senses were restrained, he was pouring out his devotional ecstasies in the form of his poetry and books. But he didn't, you know, he could have very well dealt with his government correspondences, you know, for the job he had, the British court, right there at 2 in the morning or 3 in the morning or 5 or 6 or 7. No, he waited until after breakfast, right? So we should do something similar to that. The point is, you know, I don't want to belay the point, but it's really important. And I think a lot of devotees underestimate that. Like, they don't protect their bhakti lata creeper enough during those morning hours. They get distracted and lured into, you know, and get sucked into to social media and internet, you know, thus diluting the strength of their bhakti during the morning program. So, you know, those messages will still be, and you've noticed, at least I noticed, like, if you just like vashehi yasindriyani, you like, you know, no, I'm gonna turn on this phone after breakfast, or, you know, after 7:30 or whatever, you know. And then you realize, oh my God, I was making such a big my mind was making such a big deal out of something that, you know, I only have 2 messages or 3 messages. It's like, yeah, this is just such a big, you know, such what's the word? An over it's over
Obsession.
Huh?
Obsession.
I don't know what that word means, Prabhu.
Yeah, like today, especially people are more obsessed with this mobile. No?
Yeah, an obsession.
Kind of
And the point is, like, when you control yourself and you go there only, like, you know, whatever, 3 hours or 4 hours after you would have initially, you realize it's totally oversold. It's in other what's the word? When something is worth much less than what it's
It's-
made out to be.
And there's a term which we call as FOMO, fear of missing out. Normally people say that.
Yeah, exactly. Also the
Yeah.
fear of missing out.
So people have that fear of missing out. So they will not see maybe a couple of messages and they will lose something.
Yeah, exactly.
Actually,
And you
that's not
realize
the
that actually I
case.
didn't really lose anything. And actually I gained so much because during those 3 or 4 or 2 hours, I was really absorbed in Krishna, and Krishna's happy. And I've found satisfaction in the self. That's the point. Finding satisfaction in the self, because you've really poured the water only on the root. Only on the root during those, at least during those morning hours, And because you've poured water only on the root, then you've got, you being a part and parcel of Krishna, you're being nourished way more than you would have been nourished if you had poured, 80% of the water or 60% of the water on the root, but, 25 and 30% on other things that won't give you satisfaction, that only leave you restless, that only leave you restless. Okay, let's take a little 5-minute break, and then we'll go to the other questions. Okay.
Right.
All right. So see you in 5.
Okay.
Jai Jai.
Keep going.
Okay. So I don't want to go back to what we were talking about, but just to finish, there's one thing I forgot to mention. There's this verse, I forgot the number, but it's right in that section where Krishna says that we have to give up, or when a man gives up all varieties of sense desire arising from mental concoction, right? Mental concoction. And then, when his mind finds satisfaction in the self alone, right? Then he is said to be in pure transcendental consciousness. Coming back to this social media stuff, when you think about it, practically speaking, unless they're very devotional, and directed towards glorifying God, every single post and feed that you get on social media is basically a mental concoction of someone. It's a mental concoction of someone. It's someone's mental concoction. And so when you open yourself up to absorbing, to eating, symbolically speaking, to consuming those feeds, those posts, again, unless they're pictures of, like I just started following Radha Govinda. There's like these beautiful, Rupa Goswami's Radha Govinda deities that are in Jaipur. They're phenomenal. The deities of Rupa Goswami. It's like, wow. I remember B.B. Govinda Maharaj once described them to me. He said they're thunderous or something like that. So, of course, those posts are nice, but the ads and everything else, and most of the time is just like yuck. And so those are mental concoctions. And so you're allowing yourself during those morning hours when that time is so geared towards absorption in thoughts of Krishna, when sattva guna is so prominent, why should you feed the hungry dog? Why should you feed the hungry beast who actually doesn't care about you, doesn't care about your welfare?
Right.
And why should you absorb the mental concoction of a non-devotee, into your consciousness? You're going to have to confront those things anyway during the rest of the day, unless you're a sannyasi. You're going to have to work. You're going to have to, whatever. So, and of course, there's some room there for entertainment, for recreation. Like again, I had a lot of association with Ridana March, but I remember, and I'm not saying this is like what every person should do, but like I remember we were at the fag end of our European tour 5 years ago, and he would take a break and he would watch 1940s black and white science fiction movies. And he told me once, he's like, yeah, I had, there's so much pressure with, with GBC correspondences and preaching that this is how I sort of, release pressure. by watching the science fiction movies he used to watch when he was a kid, you know. So again, I'm not saying that's like a must, and I'm not saying we should not be on social media and not use our phones, but those morning hours though, those morning hours, I think I can safely say once and one last time that, you know, don't let mental concoctions of others, of non-devotees, enter into your sacred garden in those early morning hours. Okay, let us go and actually read
Thank you
these.
very much
For what?
for
For,
reminding us that that is very important, actually. Very,
cool.
very
Thank you.
important point you put, you know.
Thank you. Okay, let's do what we did actually for a while, or at least we were doing in the French group for a while, and somehow I forgot. But I like to actually go and read the actual verses that we're supposed to read, and one verse per person. Yeah, we did that, of course, before. So let us do that. I'll start, then Sorel, then Jacob, then Vignesh, then Golokananda Priya, and then Bella, if you want. And we'll just read from 455 onward. Okay? Oh, 454, sorry. I mean 254. So again, it's me, then Sorel, then Jacob, then Vignesh, then Golokananda Priya, then Bella. All right, everybody's on? Everybody's ready?
Yep, first.
Yes.
All right. Arjuna said, "What are the symptoms of one whose consciousness is thus merged in transcendence? How does he speak? And what is his language? How does he sit? And how does he walk?"
Sorry. Do you want me just to go into we're just reading the translation?
Yeah.
Okie dokie. The Supreme Personality of Godhead said, "O Partha, when a man gives up all varieties of desire for sense gratification, which arise from mental concoction, and when his mind, thus purified, finds satisfaction in the self alone, then he is said to be in pure transcendental consciousness."
Before Jacob, I would, of course, it's up to you guys, but I would prefer personally, and you're not gonna, you know, I would prefer that we all read the 1972 version of the Gita. So if you can, henceforward, you know, read the 72 version. You can find it online. I think even the BBT printed one because there was so much upheaval about the post 72 version. And like, for example, like in the original 72 version, it's not the Supreme Personality of God, it said, it's the Blessed Lord said. And you know what? That's a big difference. That's a damn big difference. Personally, even if, you know, I mean, just personally, I prefer Blessed Lord way more than Supreme Personality of Godhead. I think that that term is difficult. And furthermore, I mean, in my opinion, the point is Prabhupada wrote the Blessed Lord. So why should we change that, you know? So anyway, this is a small detail, as you like, but just so you know, I, as the teacher, I follow the 1972 version, which I have in front of my eyes here. So sorry for interrupting. Please go ahead, Jacob G.
Okay, yeah, I have the second edition, so moving forward, I'll read 1972 version, but today I'll read from the one I have.
Yeah, sure. All good.
All right, text 56. One who is not disturbed in mind, even amidst the threefold miseries, or elated when there is happiness, and who is free from attachment, fear, and anger, is called a sage of steady mind.
Yeah. In the material world, one is unaffected by whatever good or evil he may obtain, neither praising it nor despising it. He is firmly fixed in perfect knowledge.
Let me read to you the 72 version. He who is without attachment, who does not rejoice when he obtains good, nor lament when he obtains evil, is firmly fixed in perfect consciousness. Let's talk about this one a little bit, because that's one of the questions was based on this, right? And well, actually, not really, but it does touch. Remember, I asked you this question about, I quoted this purport where Prabhupada says, and I asked you to explain. And Cyril, actually, you answered quite nicely. This thing about I'm looking here.
On 256.
Yeah, such a fully Krishna conscious and not disturbed by the onslaughts of the threefold miseries. So it's very similar to this verse, you know, it's just the verse before that.
Yeah.
Now, I don't expect you to know this verse because it's from the Bhagavatam, but we are going to go into the Nectar of Devotion soon. And in the Nectar of Devotion, Prabhupada quotes a Bhagavatam verse, which he refers to here. He quotes and refers to all the time, and I mean in so many books, and in which actually in the Nectar of Devotion he actually says should be the motto for every devotee. I mean, imagine what a statement he makes. He says this verse should be the motto or the whatever, the mantra, the defining, philosophy. I think he says the motto, if I'm not mistaken, but it basically should be, guideline maybe. It should be the guideline for every devotee. So can anyone among you here guess what verse from the 10th canto actually is Prabhupada alluding here when he says he accepts all miseries as the mercy of the Lord, thinking himself only worthy of more trouble due to his past misdeeds. And he sees that his miseries, by the grace of the Lord, are minimized to the lowest. No? Okay, then let me, even Vignesh?
I don't remember.
Okay, does this verse sound familiar to you? Tattenu kampam susamikshmano bunjana evatma kritam vipakam ridvagva purbi vidadan namaste jiveta yomukti pade sadayabak. Does that sound familiar?
Yes, I think Prabhupada used to quote a lot. The Daya Bhak. I heard that word.
Dayabak, the inheritance. If you guys want to look it up, it's 10:14:8. 10:14:8. Those prayers by Brahma, there's so many amazing verses in there, including my favorite verse about dress code. The Stanistitaha verse. Gyane prayasamudapasvinamanta eva jivanti sanmukaritam bhavadiya varta stanistitaha. While remaining in one's socially accepted position. Why is it so difficult for leaders of ISKCON to understand that? I do not understand. Why it's so difficult to understand that householders, congregation members should be allowed to perform the Yuga Dharma, to hear and chant, to do something which Lord Chaitanya says there's no hard and fast rules. At ISKCON temples, which are their platform for sharing Krishna consciousness as much as it is the platform for renounced brahmacharis and sannyasis to share their Krishna consciousness with the world, given that we're a tradition which allows householders to be as much gurus as renouncers. Why is it so difficult for ISKCON leaders in many places to give that room for householders to represent in their own body language their Krishna consciousness at ISKCON centers? It just boggles my mind. I feel like, I don't know, I feel like I'm, because, I feel like, I'm sorry as apprentices, but I feel like I'm, I know I'm pretty fallen, and I know I'm not special at all, for sure. There's nothing special about me. And yet I'm like, why is it that, I feel like I was in this point, I'm coming from the future. I'm like a Terminator, it's coming from the future and like, hey guys, like, hello, like, this is where we have to turn right here, like, hello. Anyway, sorry. So let's go back to this 10:14:8. Is everyone there? Do you guys have it in front of you?
Yes.
Okay,
Yes.
well, since you said yes first, so I'll read it for us, please.
My dear Lord,
Mm-hmm.
one who earnestly waits for you to bestow your causeless mercy upon him, all the while patiently suffering the reactions of his past misdeeds and offering you respectful obeisances with his heart, words, and body, is surely eligible for liberation, for it has become his rightful claim.
So this verse, Prabhu, regardless of your, getting your Bhakti Shastri degree, is a verse you really, really, really should learn by heart, and you should apply, and you should recite this verse when you encounter difficulties in your life. you know. It's like Bhaktivedanta Swami used to call it, you know, spiritual technology that you can actually incorporate into your life. You know, you shift gears into this verse. Literally, you shift your gears into this verse when the going gets tough, you know. And so now that we have this verse in front of us, who would like to volunteer in explaining or giving the answer to the question I asked? Like, please give the theological explanation here about this.
Anyone?
Harbo?
Okay. Well, I don't feel like my answer, I mean, I guess you could tie it in a little bit with the Bhagavatam verse, but I'll just read what I have here and then maybe someone else could add on to it. So anyways, by always thinking of the Lord and remaining conscious of his presence, the ocean of material existence becomes like the water contained in a calf's footprint. The yogi sees fortunate and unfortunate circumstances as opportunities for further meditation on the Lord by realizing that whatever the circumstance may be, it has been given to the living entity for his edification. In this way, one's mind remains fixed on the lotus feet of the Lord Sri Krishna, and this meditation allows him to remain aloof despite unfavorable or favorable circumstances. The devotee trains his mind to see the Lord everywhere at all times. This is the art of Krishna consciousness. And as explained in Bhagavad Gita 240, even a little advancement on this path can save one from the most dangerous types of fear.
Very nice. This is the one thing that I think Vaishnavas have an advantage over Christians, among several, and that is the belief in past lives and in karma, and the karmic reactions of one's past misdeeds, right? And so you can only believe that it's God's mercy upon you when you're suffering. No, I'm wrong, actually, because a lot of Christians actually believe it's actually amazing how, like, even though they don't believe in karma, they don't believe in a past life, and so for them it really is a huge question mark, like, why am I suffering, right? The question of evil is like a big question mark for them. But it's amazing how, in spite of having zero rational explanation as to why they're suffering, except perhaps that it was Adam and Eve's fault in the first place, and we're suffering their the result of their mistake, which Bhaktivedanta Thakur totally rejects. That was one of his main criticisms of Christianity. It's like, it's nobody's fault but mine. Coming back to Led Zeppelin and Jean-Paul Sartre. Remember I told you about that song, it's nobody's fault but mine. It's nobody's fault but mine. So without wanting to lose my stream of thought, they still manage to believe that anyway, it's God is good and there's a plan behind here. It's kind of like what Jacob said, right? They see it, but I wanted to focus more on this idea of karma and past lives. Like, I'm suffering because I performed I caused some suffering to some other jiva in the past, in this life or in some past life, and now it's just the law, the strict, cold, mechanic laws of karma enacting a reaction which I deserve. It's payback time, right? And then there's this on top. So that's the foundational belief, which gives a rational explanation as to why I'm suffering. It's no more a question mark. There's zero question mark. I'm suffering because I deserve it, because I caused that same suffering to someone else. Next question, right? It's no more. There's no mystery whatsoever. There is zero mystery. I'm suffering because I caused that suffering to others. What goes around comes around to individual souls. All right. But then there's this added devotional thing, which is really cool, and which, resembles what Christians talk about here. And that is that God is good, God is kind, God is merciful. And therefore, actually, I'm getting a lot less than I should be getting. We often hear devotees say, like, if they cut their finger, they're like, well, actually, I should have had my whole hand cut off, right?
Mhm.
I just got a little cut. And again, I'm sorry. No, it's not that I'm sorry, but I just, Redan Enemarj makes great philosophical points sometimes. And so he says, we have to believe that Krishna is allowing us to experience the minimum amount of suffering necessary for us to, grow spiritually. Because you could say, okay, it's Krishna's mercy that he's minimizing the suffering to, like, let's say, a cut in the finger instead of having my hand cut off completely. But who's to say, like, where does he draw the line? Why didn't he, like, I don't know, just a little tiny, not even a cut in the finger. What if it was just like a little pinch? What if it's just a tiny little scratch? Or what if it's nothing at all? Like, where does Krishna specifically decide to minimize, or when does he stop minimizing, the reaction that you're supposed to get? You know what I mean? And so a good answer to that is that we have to believe that he's giving us that suffering we're experiencing is the rock bottom. Like, like you go to a store and there's a sale and you're getting the rock bottom sale price. Like, the price cannot be lower than that. It's just like, it's reduced to the utmost possible, right? So in a similar way, the suffering we're getting, we have to believe, is the minimum amount of pain and suffering that Krishna, in his omniscience and all intelligence, considers to be the best medicine for us. And we should believe that whatever that is, it's way less than what we actually technically should be suffering. As a matter of fact, Bhakti Charu Swami once told me that he heard, I don't know who he heard it from, probably Sridhar Swami. Anyway, the Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur had said once, or written once, that if Krishna was not merciful, living entities in human bodies or in general could not even breathe. In other words, their karma, if they're really going to get the fruit of their karma, like tit for tat, like, exactly as you sow, thou shalt reap, with no consideration of mercy and reducing the crime penalty, so to speak, living entities should not be able to even breathe. So much choked up by our own, past bad karma, we would be, right? Mm. So that's what I was trying to get at. This very important point of believing in karma and individual responsibility for past trouble or past suffering, past trouble caused to others, and as a result, suffering in this life as a result. And on top of that, the thick layer of bhakti or belief that Krishna is, in spite of that, or with that, really, really, really kind and merciful, and he reduces our suffering to a great extent. Like yesterday, I was walking in the metro. I was walking back to where I'm staying, and there was like 3 or 4 teenagers. And as they were walking, it was in the street actually, on my way to the metro. It was in the metro, and one of them had green hair, and they were just laughing and walking. And I don't know, it just struck me how kind Krishna is. Not to just those 3 or 4 teenagers, but when you think about it, Krishna gives us so much leeway. Like if we were actually not even being able to breathe, then how kind is Krishna that in spite of us, eating meat and having illicit sex and gambling and having intoxication and not giving a damn about him whatsoever, maybe in rare cases going to church once a week, or you know what I mean? And it basically totally not giving a damn about Krishna, still, instead of like, okay, well, here's your karma. This is exactly what this is what you ordered. This is what you're gonna get. You can't even breathe, buddy. No, we're walking around with green hair, hanging out in cafes and smoking our cigarettes and drinking coffee and laughing friends and, watching movies and going skiing and going surfing and having boyfriend and girlfriend, okay, those things may be generating more karma, but the very fact that we're allowed to do that, we even have the capacity to do those things, just shows you how lenient actually Krishna is in a way, Mm. Okay, let's go on. Just wanted to touch on that.
I have one question.
Please.
Other day I was just reading one of the verse from the Bhagavatam itself. Now, like I just found it surprising. Like the verse actually is in the, I think, 88th chapter of 10th canto, where I will just repeat the same verse. It says basically, the Lord says, if I especially favor someone, I gradually deprive him of his wealth. The relatives and friends of such a poverty-stricken man abandon him. In this way, he suffers one distress after another.
Can you read that one
So,
line?
I just want to know.
Can you say the one famous line?
Yeah. In this way, he suffers one distress after another.
What's the one famous line from that verse in Sanskrit?
If I especially favor someone.
Yeah, in Sanskrit.
Yasya aham anugrahami harishita dhanam saneha.
That's the line.
That is the verse.
That's the super famous line, guys. Prabhupada quoted that verse actually when he was in Vrindavan after his wife left him and he was left with no money and he was just all alone in Vrindavan and he's just laughing and he quotes that verse. Can you say that one line again?
Yasya aham anugrahami.
Which means I take away. I take away. So please go ahead. Read the second verse translation.
This verse?
Oh, well, there's two verses, right? Or one?
Yeah, this is one. This is the last verse.
Because the one after that says, in this way, his parents, his family members leave him. And anyway, please, sorry, I don't mean to interrupt.
Okay.
Please do read.
Yeah, I think that is a verse which says, when he becomes frustrated in his attempt to make money and instead befriends my devotees, I bestow my special mercy upon him.
So what's your question?
The question was basically like, on the one hand, like we say, normally when we engage in bhakti, our suffering gets reduced. But in this point, Krishna is making, if I favor someone, that is like a favor, suffering is like a favor. Right. So it seems maybe whether suffering because of the favor of the Lord or we are suffering because of our past karma. What is the exact reason for suffering?
Good question. Good question. I don't know. I mean, maybe it's a mixture of both. One thing is sure, and I think the Acharyas mentioned that, is that, once you start rendering devotional service, you're under Krishna's protection. You're no longer suffering just karma. You're definitely under Krishna's protection. You're in the palm of Krishna's hands, for sure. There's this wonderful analogy that Bhanu Swami gave once when he was speaking about, he gave a seminar on astrology and Krishna consciousness about 10, 15 years ago in Mayapur. And, if you guys don't know Bhanu Swami, he's a Japanese-Canadian sannyasi Prabhupada disciple who spent all of his career in India, actually, based in Chennai. You guys know him he's quite prominent in South India. And now he's moving to Mayapur soon. And I don't know where he got the reference to this, but he's very shastric and we trust him. And it makes sense. Imagine that your karmic destiny is like a railroad track that goes right and then left and then maybe straight for 200 feet and then turns left again. Just imagine that's your whole life. Okay, goes left, right, straight, and left, right? When you are not connected to Krishna, when you're not a devotee, when you're not practicing Krishna consciousness, then and when you say you, here the analogy is you're the train, okay? You're the train. So when you're not Krishna conscious, your wheels are 100% touching the tracks. And you follow the exact trajectory of those tracks. However those tracks were paved or bolted on the ground, wherever those turns are and the straight section, the exact trajectory, you follow that to a dot because you're totally stuck or glued to the tracks. Okay. Once you start devotional service and start taking shelter of Krishna, those wheels of yours do not touch the track. Technically, there is no more contact between the tracks and the wheels. However, and this is where it gets interesting, it's kind of depressing in a way, but generally speaking, when we look at the lives of of millions and millions of devotees, generally speaking, even though technically your wheels are not touching the track and you're held in Krishna's hands, generally speaking, you more or less follow the basic same trajectory that you would have if the wheels were touching. You see? And that's kind of cool. That's kind of like a wake-up call to remind us that, wait, hey, bhakti is not about material, getting material benefits. Bhakti is not about, what's it called? Prosperity gospel. Just put your hand on that screen and say Jesus, and, you'll get a new car. Or, dial 9, whatever. Send in that $1,000 donation and just believe that, that Jesus will give you. Or, quite frankly, worship Surya or worship Ganesh, and, just basically doing business with God for material benefits, right? So in a way that protects us from that motivation, and it just kind of brings us back to reality that, hey, okay, I'm a devotee now. My life will be much better because, for one thing, I'm gonna do a lot less of the things that do degrade me, like illicit sex, gambling, intoxication. When I think in my life, especially like I'm not married, right? I'm 48. I've never been married. Oh my God, the amount of non-dharmic relationships I probably would have had, without being Krishna conscious for the last 30 years is unthinkable, but Krishna saved me like crazy, right? That's just an example. I mean, I stopped smoking because I became a devotee. Who knows? I would probably still be smoking, definitely drinking, so just forget about, getting more money or more things or more of that. Even, Krishna definitely saves us from a more degraded and suffering life in this life, what to speak of the karmic reactions you get, for the next one. And in some cases, Krishna does change the trajectory. Like, for example, either way, like one devotee, actually Bhakti Charuswami, he told me that one famous astrologer told him that, like, right after he took sannyas, he told him, in 5 years, you're going to get married. And he was like, oh shit, like, I'm a sannyasi, and then, those 5 years came and he didn't get married. He stayed, he was a sannyasi for the rest of his life, and vice versa too. There's cases like in your chart, there's no marriage, and boom, you get married. Or, hey, according to your chart, you have no money, but you're really rich. Or, so Krishna does change one's destinies. But generally speaking, the trajectory is basically the same, even though you're not technically touching the rails. And I think that's the good answer to your question.
Yeah. Thank you, Prabhu.
Welcome. All right. Well, we got 5 minutes. Who's next?
Yeah. Okay. One who is able to withdraw the senses from sense objects, as the tortoise draws its limbs within the shell, is firmly fixed in perfect consciousness.
So draw those limbs in at least during those morning hours, okay? Tomorrow, at least let's do it tomorrow. All right, let's the 5 of us take a vow that tomorrow morning we're not gonna go on social media until whatever, let's say 8 a.m. Okay, at least I take that vow. Tomorrow we're gonna be turtles in the morning. But turtles, that's just 50% of the equation. We're going to be turtles, but at the same time, we're going to be engaging those very limbs in chanting the holy name and hearing the holy name, right? And that makes a big difference. Okay, and now for our superstar verse, who's reading after you? I forget. It's Bella.
No.
Do you want to read 259 for us?
259 Bhagavad Gita.
Mm-hmm. Did we just lose her? Maybe you have to unmute yourself.
While she's looking, and Chandra, what are the verses we're supposed to memorize in these 2 chapters?
I'll ask Madhavendra. I think it's in your booklet. It's in
Yeah.
your handbook, isn't it?
It is, yes.
It's in the
Do you
handbook.
know where it is? Which page? Anybody?
I don't know which page, but it's in the way beginning of the handbook.
The beginning of the handbook.
Yeah, I want to say like the first 10 pages, it's in there.
Okay.
All
I
right,
think it's page number 14.
Bella, if you can't read, we'll just, I guess I'll read it because I'm next. So I'll just wait 3-4 more seconds and then. Oh,
Yes, I can read it.
okay, cool.
One whose mind remains undisturbed amidst misery, who does not crave for pleasure, and who is free from attachment, fear, and anger, is called a sage of steady wisdom.
Oh, are we in 58 here?
59.
59. No, 59.
59.
Vishaya vinivartante niraharasya dehina rasa varjam rasyopyasya param drishtva nivartate.
Yeah.
I read the wrong sloka.
Mm-hmm. All right, well, you're muted again, so you got it? Can you read 259 or? You're muted.
I can.
Okay. All right, go ahead. 259. You're creating suspense here for all of us for this most important verse in the passage. Okay, listen, you muted yourself again, so I don't know.
No. I can't find it.
Oh, okay, so then I'll read it, okay? Because we've got only a few
Okay.
minutes left. So 259, this is really the key verse in this whole section, and in a way, it's like the whole, it's the bhakti explanation, isn't it, Jacob? It's like, this is from where Prabhupada gets his whole, this is the verse that Prabhupada sort of repeats in every other verse before and after this verse. And this is what distinguishes us from, the impersonalists, right? And so the embodied soul may be restricted from sense enjoyment, though the taste for sense objects remains. But ceasing such engagement by experiencing a higher taste, he is fixed in consciousness. A great example is kirtan, isn't it? Like, let's say let's say before the kirtan, let's say there's a kirtan on Saturday night and you haven't had, you're not able to get the association of devotees, and then your consciousness is crap because maybe you've broken some of the regulative principles, or you've just watched too much Instagram or whatever, or who knows, maybe you broke the, you smoked, whatever it is, you're in bad consciousness, you're in the mode of passion and ignorance, it, you get your butt into that kirtan, right? And then you start chanting, and that holy, the sweetness of the holy name descends to a great degree, isn't it? And by the end of that kirtan session, you don't really want to, break the principles, or, you feel enlivened, right? And so that you've literally ceased that engagement precisely because you participated in the kirtan. So by participating in the kirtan and therefore getting the higher taste, which descends, right? Narottam Das Thakur says, Golokera Premadana Harinam Sankirtan. Who doesn't know this expression? This is an Indradyumna Swami favorite, really important. Who doesn't know this quote? Golokera Premadhana Harinam Sankirtan.
The holy name of the Lord.
Oh, you know, but who doesn't know it? Jacob, do you know that verse? Golokera Premadhana Harinam Sankirtan?
I can't tell you the translation, but I've heard it.
Oh, what's the use of that? What about Sorel?
I'm in the same boat as Jakob. Like, I heard it said 1,000,000 times, but I don't know exactly what it means.
And Vignesh, you know it, right?
I heard it, yes.
But you know the meaning?
Yes, like Harinam Sankirtan is like a vibration coming directly from the Golok Vrindavan.
Yeah.
You know, it's like something which is coming directly as a expression of love, you know, from the spiritual
what
world.
does Dan? Dan means wealth, right? Dan means wealth, a treasure. So Golokera, prema dan, the wealth of prema, the wealth of love of God. Prema dan, the wealth of prema dan, of Goloka Vrindavan, of the highest planet among all the Vaikuntha planets, where Krishna and his intimate associates are having these intimate dealings where souls even forget that Krishna's God. That love that's experienced in that planet, Golokera Premadana, that treasure house, Harinam Sankirtan, has been brought down into the material world through Harinam Sankirtan. I remember I was on a Harinam with Indra Swami. We're just about to start. We're near the beach in Poland. And as the devotees were, strapping their mridangas and getting ready to go, I said, Gurudev, because they call him Gurudev. So I said, Gurudev, I have a question. Like Narottam Das Thakur says, Golokera Premadana Harinam Sankirtan, the treasure house of Goloka Vrindavan comes down through Harinam Sankirtan. I mean, it goes down, it literally goes down through us, because we're singing. We're the ones who are singing. But we're not pure devotees. We're not pure. So how does that prema, that pure love of God, go through an opaque, non-transparent medium, non-pure medium like us? Right? It's a good question. And I'll always remember his answer. He thought for a second, and he kind of smirked and he said, somehow it makes its way through us. Somehow it makes its way through us, just somehow or other, it just, in spite of our thickness, in spite of our opacity, in spite of us, we're like we're like walls of titanium through which, you have this, like, these special metals that, like, are radioactive proof, like, even radioactive, rays cannot go through. So in a way, like, sometimes we're like that, dude, like nothing goes through us, but still somehow the holy name is so merciful that it still makes its way through, and therefore gives us that higher taste. And because of that higher taste, we refrain. But how long do we refrain? That's the question. How long do we refrain? An hour, and then we're right back on our bad habits, so that's another thing. Like, once we get that higher taste, we have to somehow protect it and keep feeding it with more hearing and chanting, and keep pouring the water on the root, and really keep on satisfying the self, giving satisfaction to the self, big S. Jai Prabhu's.
Haribo.
Haribo. All right, well, we've gone over, so we don't even have time to do a little kirtan, but we glorified Krishna, so that is kirtan. Right. So let me figure out what Madhavendra will do with you next week, because we really didn't go through many of the verses, Jesus, but such an important topic. I think we did well today. All right, well, listen, wish you a great week, and hope we meet up in 2 weeks, healthy and happy in Krishna consciousness.
Jai.
Jai.
You too, Prabhu. Have a great week.
Thank
Hare
you.
Krishna.
You too. Haribo. All the best.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
You.
You're welcome.